You're listening to Dark Rain Chronicles. The rain hides many things, but it also remembers. Secrets washed away, voices swallowed by the storm. These are the stories it brings back, and tonight, you will hear them. It was last Tuesday when I unearthed the television set. Better, infinitely better, had it remained entombed in that lightless recess of the cellar, cloaked in the dust of ages, and festooned with the brittle lacework of spiders. But curiosity, that fatal flaw, prevailed. Now slumber offers no sanctuary, sustenance holds no appeal, and the darkness behind my eyelids replays only the phosphorescent horrors I witnessed, the shape that hunts me still. The house itself possessed a veneer of domestic tranquility when I acquired it. 3 bedrooms, a pair of baths, a respectable patch of green out back. The price, a consequence of foreclosure, felt like a minor miracle. The prior inhabitants simply evaporated one day, according to the agent, abandoning everything. Their misfortune, my supposed windfall. Barely a fortnight ago, my signature sealed the deal. That inaugural evening, I descended into the subterranean gloom, flashlight beams slicing through the stale air, mentally partitioning space for a workshop. Then, the light snagged on something huddled in the furthest corner, a glass countenance, a cabinet of faux wood grain, the twin prongs of archaic antennae, a cathode ray relic, perhaps birthed in the 70s. It possessed a leaden inertia, resisting my initial efforts to shift its bulk. Before condemning it to the landfill, I decided to test its pulse. 20 minutes of scouring grime and locating a working socket culminated in the press of a power button. Against all expectation, the machine stirred. The screen convulsed with static. A serpent's hiss filled the silence. And then, an image coalesced from the electronic snow. Recognition struck like a physical blow. The basement. My basement. Identical concrete ramparts, the same sturdy support columns, the familiar silhouette of the washing machine against the far wall. Yet, this was no live transmission. The appliance flickering on screen was an earlier vintage, and the perspective was skewed, high up, nestled near the ceiling joists like a malevolent eye. A timestamp glowed dimly in the corner. 06 Daldra 14 December 1994, 3:47 a.m. The visual quality bore the ghostly patina of aged surveillance tape, washed out and spectral. For long minutes, stillness reigned on the screen. Then, a disturbance in the deepest shadows behind the washer. A hand materialized, digits elongated, pallid flesh stretched taut over skeletal structure. An arm followed, impossibly emaciated. A shoulder, sharp as a blade. A head. The entity hauled its grotesque form into the weak illumination. It moved quadrupedally, yet its gait defied any terrestrial biology, limbs bending with the geometry of nightmare. Its head swiveled completely, unnaturally, keeping its face perpetually aimed towards the hidden lens as it scuttled forward. The face. Dear God. Featureless planes of skin where eyes should have resided. A mouth stretched far too wide. A cavity bristling with needle-sharp dentition. It crawled, deliberate and obscene, towards the basement stairs and began to ascend. The feed abruptly switched, displaying the living room above. The date stamp remained constant. Through the nocturnal stillness of the house, the creature prowled, investigating each room with unnerving patience. A hunter surveying its domain. My fingers fumbled for the power switch. Ineffective. I wrenched the plug from the wall. The image persisted, luminous and unwavering. Having completed its reconnaissance of the ground floor, the thing flowed upwards, another jarring cut in perspective. It now stood within a bedroom. In the bed, oblivious, slept a man and a woman. The creature regarded them, head canted at an angle that defied anatomy. Then, slowly, deliberately, a rictus split its face. With a strangled cry, I seized the television and hurled it violently to the concrete floor. The screen fractured, starred with fissures, yet the picture held fast. The entity on screen turned, its eyeless face locking onto the camera, onto me's. Its maw gaped, stretching wider, wider still, impossibly distending until the screen plunged into absolute blackness. I fled upstairs, barricading myself within my bedroom, heart hammering against my ribs. Sleep was an impossibility that night. Dawn arrived, pale and mocking. Steeling myself, I returned to the cellar. The television set had vanished. Only shards of broken glass glittered accusingly on the floor, but its absence offered no relief. Now, phantoms writhe in the periphery of my vision. A dry, chitinous rasp echoes within the walls after dark, and sometimes, reflected in mirrors, a fleeting glimpse of something standing just behind my shoulder. Something pale. Something grinning. Last night, tucked away in a forgotten drawer, I discovered brittle newspaper clippings concerning this very house. June 15th, 1994. Local couple disappears without a trace. The previous owners, and before them, also vanished. The ones prior to that swallowed by the same silence. The scratching sound intensifies, emanating from the basement. I know its source, its patient vigil. I understand the sequence of events that must now unfold. Leaving is not an option. Some unseen tether binds me here. It will not permit escape. The electricity just died, plunging the house into profound darkness. My phone is inert, a useless brick. I hear it now, ascending the basement stairs. Slow, measured steps, each tread a pronouncement of doom. It comes for me, as it came for all the others who resided within these walls. If you happen upon these words, heed my warning. Avoid this place. Shun antiquated televisions in the shadows of cellars. Certain legacies are best left undisturbed in the gloom. The doorknob is rotating. Its silhouette elongates beneath the door. I can almost perceive the sound of its smile. It has arrived. Forgive me. This was written in haste. They insisted I convey the warning. The presence from the television. It propagates through narratives of itself, a mimetic contagion. Simple awareness makes you susceptible, allows it entry. I should never have inscribed this account. I should never have alerted you. But the ink is dry, the words are red. Refrain from peering into the unlit corners of your surroundings. And whatever you may do, resist the urge to turn around. It stands directly behind you. Ilara lifts her lens, framing the Duomo, its ancient stones bathed in a lunar glow. Just this angle, she murmurs, chasing the silver light sculpting the facade. The Neapolitan night, warm and redolent of oregano, of garlic sizzling somewhere nearby, draped itself around us. rendering our gelato plans a pleasant, distant thought. Italy, after 3 whirlwind days, had already taught us the fluid nature of time. It was then I discerned them, a phantom pairing against the vibrant backdrop. An older gentleman, sharp in pressed linen, Signor Vieri, and tethered to his presence, a silent youth named Emilio. They materialized like recurring motifs in the periphery of our evening. The bustling piazza, the whispering fountain, the trattoria, where laughter still echoed from our meal. Coincidence, I'd first thought, a common thread in the tourist tapestry. Yet, their appearances held an unsettling rhythm, a deliberate cadence that pricked at my awareness. Ilara, my voice a breath against her skin, my fingers finding her arm. The pair from the fountain. They're here. Slowly, deliberately, she lowered the camera, feigning focus on the display, while her gaze flickered sideways. A cheerful wave bloomed from Signor Vieri's hand as he closed the distance, his greeting effusive, as if encountering long-lost companions. Magnifico, for the pictures know. His English, thick with the local cadence, wrapped around us as he halted, breaching the invisible boundary of personal space. Behind him, the boy, Emilio, remained an averted gaze, a study in stillness. Ah, Americana. So very statuesque. The smile he offered was a painted thing, failing to ignite his eyes. Ilara edged nearer, the camera a shield against her chest. We really must be off, she countered, retreating a step. The group will be wondering. A necessary fabrication, our independence felt suddenly precarious, fragile under his scrutiny. His smile stretched, predatorily knowing. No group, Signorine. All evening I watch. Just 2. A dismissive flick of his hand indicated the silent Emilio. My nephew. He learns your language. Needs the, how you say, practice. We find a nice cafe. Very quiet, very private. Sirens wailed silently in my skull. The boy, Emilio, hadn't offered a single glance, evinced zero curiosity about linguistic exchange. His quietude felt brittle, deliberate, an attempt at self-erasure. No, grazie, Ilara stated, her tone firm, unwavering. We pivoted, intent on escape, but Signor Vieri sidestepped, a sudden, unwelcome obstacle, blocking our path, the hollow smile cemented in place. Then, swift as a striking snake, his hand darted out, closing around Ilara's arm, fingers digging into the flesh above her elbow. My breath hitched, my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Is rude, no? His voice shed its facile charm, hardening into something else entirely, something cold and sharp beneath the Neapolitan warmth. Just to help Emilio, you are Italian. See, look Italian. A blatant falsehood. Our fair hair and features screamed turista. Emilio shuffled his feet, a ripple of discomfort in his stillness, but remained mute, a statue carved from apprehension. Ilara strained against the hold, a vice tightening. Let go! Her voice rose, sharp with indignation, slicing through the piazza's murmur. Heads turned, fleeting glances offered like tossed coins, but the current of the evening flowed on, largely undisturbed. He switched to rapid-fire Italian, a torrent of words meant to disorient, tugging Ilara towards the maw of a darkened, uninviting alley. Instinct, honed by some long-forgotten self-defense class, surged through me. Polizia! The cry tore from my throat, raw and loud, rebounding off the Duomo's ancient face, a desperate flare in the night. Aiuto! Help! Vieri recoiled, releasing Alara as if burned. Emilio's head snapped up, his eyes wide, a startling admixture of fright and something akin to deliverance flickering across his young features. Shutters rattled open above. Lights blazed in apartment windows like sudden, watchful eyes. An elderly nonna leaned out from a balcony, her silhouette framed against the interior glow, surveying the scene below. From a nearby trattoria, 2 waiters emerged, their purposeful strides eating the distance between us, white aprons stark against the dim light. Vieri's posture shifted instantaneously, melting back into feigned affability. Ah, only friendliness, he protested, hands raised in exaggerated capitulation, a pantomime of innocence. Such drama, signorine. He retreated then, yanking Emilio with him, the pair dissolving into the shadowed labyrinth of a side street. We stood alone for a moment, trembling beneath the cathedral's impassive gaze. The piazza air suddenly charged. The waiters arrived, a barrage of concerned Italian punctuated by fractured English. Comprehension dawned quickly in their expressions, and they steered us, 2 trembling reeds, into the warm, garlic-scented haven of their restaurant. The police, the carabinieri, were summoned while the proprietress, Signora Rossi, materialized with glasses of water and soothing, incomprehensible murmurs that nonetheless calmed the frantic rhythm of our breathing. The officers materialized swiftly, their questions patient, their notebooks open. Our tale, it seemed, was a familiar refrain, a sad melody played too often on these historic streets. They produced photographs, faces of men known to prey on visitors. Signora Rossi enlisted her daughter, Isabella, whose fluent English bridged the linguistic gap, translating the official inquiries and offering quiet reassurances that felt like anchors in the churning aftermath. That evening pivoted, altering the trajectory of our journey in ways unforeseen. Signora Rossi, adamant, forbade our lone walk back through the darkened streets, bidding us wait amidst the clatter and bustle of closing time. Isabella, a university student immersed in tourism studies, spoke of Naples's concerted efforts to shield its guests, initiatives woven into the city's fabric like hidden threads of resilience. She pointed to a discreet blue emblem adhered to the trattoria window, a Turismo Sicuro sticker designating the establishment as a sanctuary, a beacon. These were the safe zones, she explained, businesses pledged to assist travelers in distress. Isabella unveiled an application on her phone, a digital map charting these havens across the urban sprawl, a geography of safety overlaid onto the ancient city plan. Dawn brought a renewed purpose. We joined a complimentary walking tour guided by local students, contemporaries of Isabella. Their narrative intertwined practical wisdom, streets best avoided post-sunset, the subtle art of spotting scams, the geography of aid, with revelations of Naples' profound beauty, its hidden courtyards spilling bougainvillea, its authentic, beating heart laid bare. Through Isabella, we tapped into a vibrant digital sorority, female explorers sharing insights, bolstering one another via a dedicated social platform. Instant connections sparked, forging spontaneous alliances for navigating the twilight hours, transforming vulnerability into shared strength. Ilara's moon-kissed shot of the Duomo, serendipitously, found its way into a city safety campaign, illustrating the very program that had sheltered us. The image became a symbol, Naples' nocturnal allure underscored by the necessity of vigilance, beauty, and caution held in delicate balance. Our Neapolitan sojourn extended 3 unplanned days, our explorations fundamentally reshaped. We navigated with newfound knowledge, charting courses through well-lit arteries, noting the reassuring blue stickers on doorways, the late-night glow of welcoming shops. Signora Rossi's trattoria became our nightly anchor, a nexus point for shared narratives and traveler camaraderie over plates of pasta and glasses of wine. The encounter recalibrated our approach to travel, yet failed to extinguish the incandescent flame of wanderlust. We discovered the delicate equilibrium between caution and curiosity, vigilance and venture. Crucially, we unearthed a profound truth. For every shadow seeking to exploit, countless hands extend in aid. Just last week, a message arrived. A lone woman traveler facing a parallel predicament in Naples recalled the Turismo Sicuro emblem from our shared post. She knew precisely where to turn. Signora Rossi's sanctuary embraced her until the Carabinieri came. When inquiries about Naples arise now, my stories bloom not with fear, but with the lingering taste of Signora Rossi's sharp, homemade limoncello, the echoes of Isabella's impassioned histories whispered against ancient walls. I speak of the nonna, a guardian angel at her window, watching until safety was assured, of the swift, unquestioning succor offered by the waiters, strangers acting as kin. That is the enduring resonance of that night, not the icy grip of apprehension, but the warm, fierce embrace of community, rising to shield its own, even the temporary kind. Ultimately, Signor Vieri, in his menace, imparted an unintended, invaluable lesson. Authentic welcome never demands or coerces, it simply offers. Genuine kindness cultivates sanctuary, not dread. The Ferris wheel shrieked metallically, ancient gears grinding in tormented symphony, as the gondola cradling me clawed its way skyward. A cold bloom of terror unfurled in my chest. I hadn't thrown the switch. Someone else stalked the skeletal remains of this derelict pleasure garden, and they knew precisely where I huddled. My name is Elias. For the better part of half a year, I've drawn breath as the nocturnal custodian of the old Dreamland amusement park. It's scarcely a calling, but it keeps the wolves of debt from the door. Besides, a peculiar, spectral charm clings to these grounds after sundown. The rides standing sentinel and silent, paint peeling like sunburned skin, pathways swallowed by shadow. A forgotten kingdom, frozen mid-decay. Most nights, my chief concern involved rooting wayward adolescents hungry for ghost stories. Tonight, however, bled differently. The shift commenced under a bruise-colored sky, the day guard melting into the twilight as I assumed my lonely vigil, the evening stretching ahead like an empty corridor filled with paperwork and patrols. The initial hours passed in quietude. I traced the park's perimeter, rattling chain-link fences, ensuring the boarded-up husks of buildings remained inviolate. Midnight approached. It was during my second circuit, amidst the looming geometric shadows of forgotten fun, that a phantom flutter snagged the edge of my vision. I pivoted, flashlight beams slicing the obsidian black. Nothing. only the silent architecture of joylessness. An attempt to rationalize settling foundations, the scurry of unseen vermin, faltered against the undeniable prickle crawling up my spine. I was being observed. The sensation intensified with each step deeper into Dreamland's corpse. Every patch of darkness seemed poised to disgorge a watcher. Each groan of wind-tortured metal tightened the knot in my stomach. My pace quickened instinctively, fingers finding the reassuring weight of the stun gun clipped to my belt. Near the skeletal remains of the carousel, its painted horses frozen mid-gallop, the sound came. Laughter. High-pitched, unhinged, it ricocheted through the desolate expanse. My heart hammered against my ribs. Identify yourself. The command emerged, thinner than intended. This area is restricted. Show yourself now. Only silence answered, thick and expectant. Then another peal of laughter, this time displaced, mocking me from a new vector. A cruel game of echoes and nerves. My radio hissed static, a dead channel. My mobile displayed a mocking void. No service. Utterly alone. Reason screamed retreat, yet some baser instinct propelled me forward. I pursued the disembodied mirth, my flashlight's cone jittering across the decay. It lured me past crumbling concession stands, towards the colossal, web-like silhouette of the Ferris wheel dominating the skyline. Approaching, I saw it, and the air turned to ice in my lungs. The wheel's control housing gaped open, a nest of severed wires exposed. Deliberate sabotage. Before the implication could fully crystallize, footfalls sounded close behind. I spun, flashlight finding only vacant air, but the sounds persisted, multiplying, seeming to emanate from everywhere at once. Panic, raw and electric, surged through me. Instinct took over. I scrambled towards the nearest refuge, an empty Ferris wheel gondola, hauling myself inside, folding low against the cold metal floor, holding my breath. The footsteps converged, grew louder, then abruptly ceased. A stretched silence descended, broken only by the frantic percussion of my own pulse. Then, with a violent, protesting lurch, the great wheel began to turn. Sheer terror seized me as my cage ascended. Whoever haunted these grounds knew my hiding place. This was torment drawn out, a predator playing with its prey. As I reached the ride's zenith, it shuddered to a halt, suspending me high above the spectral park, trapped and hideously exposed. From this unwanted perch, I could discern movement below. Not one figure, but several. Shadows detaching themselves from shadows, fanning out, sealing any potential escape. My thoughts spun. Who were they? What conceivable purpose drove them? Fragments surfaced. Odd occurrences these past months. Vanished tools. Inexplicable power surges. Whispers of strange noises on the night shift. Had it all been converging towards this moment? A voice boomed from the darkness below, amplified, distorted. A special welcome, Elias, to tonight's main event. We trust the view meets your expectations. I knew that voice. Corbin, one of the daytime security detail. The dissonance was staggering. Corbin? What the hell is this? I yelled back, battling to keep the tremor from my voice. What's happening? A cascade of answering laughter rained up from the shadows. Oh, Elias. Corbin's voice oozed false commiseration. You truly haven't grasped it, have you? You believed this was merely a forgotten playground, that your duty was to deter graffiti artists and curious teenagers. My mind struggled to assemble the pieces. This park, he continued, his tone hardening, rests upon something lucrative, Elias. Something certain parties would gladly shed blood for. And you've been the unwitting watchdog, keeping prying eyes away from our little enterprise. The awful clarity struck like a physical blow. The clandestine late-night deliveries, the cordoned-off zones declared structurally unsound. This derelict park was camouflage, narcotics, contraband. The specifics were irrelevant. My accidental proximity to their secret meant my silence had to be permanent. Now, Corbin declared, a chilling relish in his voice. A simple bullet would be efficient, but dreadfully unimaginative. We've arranged a series of challenges for you, Elias. Survive them, and perhaps there's a place for you in our operation. Fail. Well, dilapidated amusement parks are notorious for unfortunate accidents, aren't they? The Ferris wheel groaned once more, commencing its slow descent. The instant the gondola neared the ground, I launched myself out, legs threatening to buckle upon impact. I heard them coming, the predatory rhythm of their pursuit echoing through the skeletal structures, punctuated by bursts of cruel laughter. What ensued was the longest, most harrowing night of my existence. They had perverted the entire park into an arena of death. Rides roared unexpectedly to life as I dashed past, gears grinding with murderous intent. Tripwires sent me sprawling, inches from impalement on rusted metal shards. I stumbled into the warped reflections of the old funhouse mirrors, pursued by distorted phantoms, struggling to discern reality from illusion. Yet, I possessed one edge they hadn't factored. This park was etched into my bones. 6 months of solitary nocturnal patrols had mapped every shortcut, every bolt hole, every shadowed alcove onto my subconscious. I exploited this ingrained knowledge, doubling back, utilizing forgotten maintenance tunnels, turning their hunt into a disorienting maze. As the endless night bled towards morning, I sensed their mounting frustration. The taunts grew sharper, laced with genuine anger. Their traps became more desperate, less calculated. I managed, through sheer luck and adrenaline, to redirect one pursuer into a snare intended for me. Then finally, blessedly, the eastern sky began to pale, bleeding gray light into the oppressive darkness. I reached the perimeter fence, the sounds of the hunt closing fast behind me, Corbin's voice raw with frantic commands. Fueled by the last dregs of terror-induced strength, I scaled the barrier, rusted wire tearing at my palms. I tumbled onto the far side just as they slammed against the chain link. Corbin's face, a mask of incandescent rage, was the final image burned into my retinas as I sprinted towards the distant ribbon of the highway. I flagged down the first pair of headlights, a wild apparition in torn clothes, eyes wide with residual horror. The elderly couple within hesitated, understandably unnerved, but some flicker of desperation at my expression must have swayed them. They drove me directly to the town's police station. The aftermath was a maelstrom, depositions, federal agents, flashing cameras. The truth spilled out. Dreamland had served as a hub for a significant narcotics trafficking ring. Corbin and his accomplices were apprehended, along with several complicit local officials. I was lauded, offered accolades, new positions. But beneath the surface noise, the core memory remained. The stark proximity of death in that decaying playground. A mundane shift twisted into a primal struggle for survival. Now I advise on security systems, helping others prevent the kind of insidious infiltration that festered within Dreamland. Yet, sleep offers little respite. Sometimes the dream finds me, suspended again atop that skeletal Ferris wheel, gazing down upon a theme park of terror, bathed in perpetual night. And the question lingers, had the dawn delayed its arrival, would I have escaped its deadly embrace? One truth remains unshakable. I can never again view an amusement park with naive eyes. Behind the saccharine melodies and garish lights, I know now that true monstrosities can hide in plain sight, patiently waiting for nightfall and for the commencement of their terrible games. Ethelberg greeted me not with sound, but with its profound absence. No birdsong stitched the air, no engine murmured on some distant road, not even the sigh of wind teasing the foliage. Only a hush, thick and suffocating, that seemed to leach the very possibility of noise from the world. Chance and a malfunctioning compass had guided my stumbling progress here, miles off any charted path after a hike went disastrously awry. As I dragged myself down the desolate thoroughfare, each throb of my wrenched ankle a sickening beat, the conviction grew. I had trespassed into a place meticulously sealed off from the living world. The morning had dawned bright with promise, the allure of an untrodden trail beckoning me toward vistas lauded online. Moderate challenge, stunning scenery, the siren song for a solitary trekker. Yet, 3 hours dissolved into a harsh lesson in humility. The terrain steepened viciously. My water dwindled with alarming speed. Then, the fall. A treacherous shift of shale underfoot. A dizzying plummet down an embankment. My ankle folding with a wet, tearing sensation. When the world stopped spinning, I was adrift, bruised, disoriented, utterly lost. My phone offered only mocking silence, the GPS a blank screen. With the sun bleeding crimson towards the western ridges, urgency clawed at me. Shelter, assistance, anything. That's when the faint geometry of rooftops pierced the tree line. A surge of fragile hope propelled me forward, a limping pilgrimage toward presumed sanctuary. But proximity warped hope into a queasy apprehension. Ethelberg. It felt less like a town, and more like a meticulously curated museum exhibit. The facades lining its main street, though faded, possessed a startling, almost aggressive cleanliness. Artifacts plucked from some bygone decade. The 50s, perhaps. Automobiles rested at peculiar angles, abandoned mid-maneuver, their chrome gleaming dully. And over everything, that profound, watchful stillness. Hello. My voice, ripped raw, felt obscenely loud, an intrusion upon the consecrated quiet. Is anyone there? I need help. Silence answered. Not even the ghost of an echo returned my plea. The air itself felt absorbent, dead. I hobbled towards the flicker of a neon sign. Open, pulsing weakly above what appeared to be a diner. A muffled clapper announced my entry as the door swung inward, revealing a time capsule of mid-century Americana. Crimson vinyl booths gleamed softly, A jukebox stood sentinel in the corner, mute. Yet the space was utterly devoid of life. Hello. I tried again, the word barely a whisper, suddenly fearful of disturbing this unnatural calm. Please, I'm injured. I just need to make a call. My vision adjusting to the gloom, I saw it. A table, set for one. A half-finished meal, meatloaf, peas, sat cooling, the gravy congealing into a greasy skin. Beside it, a mug of coffee sent faint tendrils of steam into the air, as if the occupant had simply evaporated mid-mouthful. A tremor, cold and visceral, traced its way up my spine. Something was profoundly, fundamentally wrong here. Retreating from the diner, heart hammering against my ribs, I found the street subtly altered. Shadows stretched like grasping fingers as the sun sank lower. Then, a flicker. Across the way, within the darkened window of a shop, movement. A face, stark white, hollow-cheeked, observed me for a heartbeat before vanishing behind a drab curtain. "Wait!" I cried out, lurching towards the shop front. "Please, I need assistance." My hand reached for the handle, but the door swung open before I touched it. An ancient woman stood framed in the doorway. Her eyes were deep-set wells in a face of parchment-thin skin, yet they held a piercing intensity that rooted me to the spot. "You oughtn't be here," she rasped, her voice a dry rustle of leaves. "Nowhere's safe come nightfall." Before thought could follow surprise, her grip, astonishingly firm, clamped onto my arm. She pulled me inside, the door slamming shut with unnerving finality. The interior was a general store, its shelves burdened with dust-laden tins and relics of outdated domesticity. "What is this place?" I stammered, the tremor now shaking my voice. "Where is everyone? My ankle. I just need to find help." "Hush," she hissed the command, a bony finger pressed hard against her lips. "They'll hear." "Who?" The word was a choked whisper, fear tightening its coils in my stomach. The crone peered through a grimy pane of glass, her gaze darting nervously along the empty street. "The others," she breathed, the word cryptic, heavy with dread. "The ones who tidied everyone away. We hailed them as saviors once. Promises they brought. Life unending, bodies perfected. Oh, how readily we drank their words." I stared, grappling with the fragmented horror in her voice. "I don't understand. What others? What happened in Ethelberg?" She turned from the window, her ancient eyes clouded with sorrow and terror. 5 years now. Strangers arrived, bearing miracles in vials. A cure for age, they claimed. A balm for every ailment. And it was true, for a time. But then, her voice dissolved, a shudder racking her frail body. People began unwinding, not just halting age, but reversing it. Younger, ever younger, till they simply weren't. Infants one dawn, vanished by dusk, and those like me, who refused the gift. We are the remnants, the hiders, the waiting. Vertigo washed over me. Her narrative sketched a reality too monstrous to readily accept. "Impossible," I faltered. "Things like that, they don't happen." A laugh, brittle and devoid of mirth, escaped her. Child, you know nothing of what's possible, but you must go. Now, before they sense you. As if summoned by her fear, a low, pervasive humming began to thrum in the air, vibrating through the floorboards. The old woman's eyes widened, stark terror eclipsing all else. "They're coming," she whispered urgently. "Hide yourself." She shoved me towards a doorway at the rear of the shop, but I resisted, pulling back. "Wait. I can't leave you. Come with me. We can get away together." A resolute shake of her head. Too old, too slow. I would only condemn you. Go. Now. And whatever happens, don't let them find you. Don't listen to their promises. Run. The humming intensified, resonating deep within my bones. Through the shop windows, a strange, pulsing luminescence began to paint the street in shades of unnatural blue. Against every instinct screaming protest, I obeyed. Hobbling frantically, I stumbled into the back, finding a cramped storage closet. I squeezed inside, pulling the door almost shut, leaving only a sliver. Through the crack, I watched the shop dissolve in ethereal azure light. Voices arose, not human speech, but a dissonant chorus of whispers, overlapping, unintelligible, ancient. I held my breath, flattening myself against the rough wooden wall. The whispers seemed to swirl closer. Shadows writhed just beyond my flimsy concealment. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm I was certain they must perceive. Then abruptly, as swiftly as it began, silence. The blue light receded. The humming ceased. Time stretched, measured only by the frantic pulse in my ears. Finally, summoning courage I didn't possess, I eased the door open. The shop stood empty. No trace of the old woman. No sign of the entities she had feared. I crept out, my ankles screaming with each hesitant step, back towards the entrance. Outside, Ethelberg remained unchanged, vacant still, locked in its temporal stasis. But now I carried the weight of its grotesque secret. I didn't linger. Ignoring the fire in my ankle, I ran. I ran until the spectral outline of the town vanished behind me, until asphalt appeared beneath my feet, until the headlights of a passing truck offered a lifeline back to the mundane world. The driver regarded my frantic tale of Ethelberg with bewildered pity, but mercifully delivered me to the sterile normalcy of the nearest hospital. I never filed a report. Who would lend credence to such a story? There are days I struggle to believe it myself. Yet, on nights when the world falls unnaturally quiet, the memory surfaces. The crone's warning, the humming dread, the faces that weren't faces. I think of the people of Ethelberg, consumed by the promise of forever, and a chilling certainty settles deep in my bones. Some places are best left undisturbed. Some silence is better left unbroken, lest you wander into a stillness from which there is no return. That first sighting remains indelible, clinging like the prints themselves. Afternoon light surrendered the cellar to deepening shadows when I paused, my lungs raw from hours stirring the dust of ages, packing away relics in cardboard tombs. The air was thick, sepulchral, each breath tasting of mildew and time. I leaned against the cold stone, rubbing grit from exhausted eyes, and then I saw them, aqueous impressions adhering impossibly to the ceiling joists, inverse tracks traversing the grime, as if something sodden and unseen had paced the upper dark. My heart gave a violent lurch. I straightened, vision swimming, willing the phenomenon away as a trick of the failing light, an optical fallacy born of fatigue. Yet they persisted, those glistening marks, shimmering faintly, their outlines ragged, imbued with a cold, animate quality. My neck protested the awkward angle of my gaze. Silence descended, thick and absolute, save for the frantic pulse hammering behind my ears. I dared not move. Decades this house had stood in our family's name, though years had passed since I'd last crossed its threshold, escaping its brooding quiet for a constricted city existence. Uncle Silas's plea had drawn me back. Age had claimed his strength, and the house needed purging before sale. I'd never found solace within these walls, too vast, too silent. Every shadowed corner hinted at taciturn sorrows. The cellar, especially, had always radiated unease, yet nothing had prepared me for this. Hesitantly, my boots scuffing the concrete, I crept nearer. A peculiar odor permeated the air, an acrid telluric tang, redolent of wet rock and something else, something metallic. The footprints resolved into clearer focus, ovoid shapes, vaguely shoe-like but subtly wrong, the toes canted unnaturally. A palpable cold emanated from them. Trembling, I reached upward, my fingers brushing the timber where one mark lay darkest. They came away slick with a frigid, dew-like dampness. A shudder traced its icy path down my spine. I recoiled, careful not to disturb the scene further. I was utterly alone, the cellar door bolted securely from within. No intruder could have passed unheard. How could these prints manifest overhead? Reason fractured against the impossibility. My gaze swept the subterranean gloom. Stacked boxes, a skeletal dresser, scattered tools, and canted against the far wall, the tall pier glass. That mirror, its frame a tarnished riot of serpentine carvings choked with verdigris, was an original fixture. I recalled it from childhood, perpetually shrouded, relegated to obscurity. Now unveiled, it drank the meager light of the single bare bulb, throwing back my own warped image, fragmented by age spots and fine cracks. For an instant, behind my reflection, a ripple disturbed the surface like heat haze. I spun around. Nothing. Only the prints, static and gleaming. Sleep offered little refuge that night. The unfamiliar mattress in the old upstairs room felt treacherous beneath me. I strained to hear through the floorboards, imagining glutinous sounds from below, sitting bolt upright in the dark, breath held captive. Morning found me descending the cellar steps with leaden reluctance. The footprints were there, but altered. They now traced a path down the sidewall, a vertical traverse aimed squarely at the mirror. A low curse scraped my throat, my stomach twisting. I scrubbed a hand over my jaw's rough stubble, grasping for logic. Water seepage, capillary action forming patterns. But why these shapes? Why this constant, deliberate migration? Kneeling, I examined them anew. Still damp. Still unnervingly cold. They seemed to beckon towards the glass. The following days blurred into a routine of strained normalcy. I hauled boxes, sorted brittle papers, arranged furniture for removal, all while the cellar exerted its morbid pull. Each morning brought a fresh configuration of prints, spanning beams, adorning the opposite wall, sometimes coiling in dizzying spirals. Always they appeared freshly made, slick and cold, the strange mineral scent clinging to the air. And always, the mirror drew my eye, its reflection subtly wrong. My movements seemed echoed a fraction too late, the perspective skewed, as if observing a reality adjacent to, but not quite aligned with my own. On the fourth day, I resolved upon a test. I procured a heavy plastic sheet and draped it entirely over the mirror. For good measure, I hammered a nail into a nearby beam and hung a thick, dust-laden quilt over the plastic shroud. Then, sweeping the floor with vigorous strokes, I tried to dispel the viscous apprehension crawling over my skin. I locked the cellar door firmly and drove into town, seeking mundane errands, convinced this would halt the absurdity. Upon my return that evening, the tarp and quilt lay discarded, crumpled heaps in a corner. The footprints had returned to the ceiling, now forming a frantic, broken path, suggestive of thwarted intent. My breath hitched, my heart hammered against my ribs, drowning thought. I flicked the light switch off, then on again. Futile. The mirror stood exposed, reflecting my rigid form at the stair base, a sheen of cold sweat highlighting my brow. Flight screamed through every nerve. Abandon this place, this task, Uncle Silas's request, be damned. Yet the need for the sale proceeds anchored me, alongside something else, an insidious fascination coiled within me, a desperate compulsion to comprehend. Perhaps this was communication, an alien cartography, a cipher demanding interpretation. I began to observe them with heightened intensity. Daily rearrangements yielded forms I couldn't name, sometimes arrows pointing insistently toward the glass, sometimes looping curves that induced vertigo if stared at too long. I tried sketching their positions, documenting the patterns, but my hand trembled uncontrollably, the pencil strokes erratic. My breathing grew shallow, accompanied by the prickling certainty of unseen scrutiny. "What is it you want?" I rasped into the void one night, my voice thin and cracking. The prints remained impassive, dark sigils gleaming on the timber above. I approached the mirror, the drumming in my chest intensifying. Is someone there? My reflection stared back, pale, strained. No answer. But as I turned away, a peripheral tremor in the silver depths caught my eye. A minute distortion, as if the image shifted infinitesimally after I did. By week's end, exhaustion had become a permanent state. My temples pulsed with a dull ache. A metallic bitterness coated my tongue. Every creak of the ancient house sent jolts through me. I found myself avoiding the cellar, yet simultaneously drawn towards it, trapped in a cycle of dread and morbid curiosity. During one particularly fraught afternoon, I determined to examine the mirror's reverse. Wrestling it away from the wall, I discovered something taped to the age-darkened wood backing, a sepia-toned photograph, brittle with age. It showed a figure standing in this very cellar, lantern held aloft. The visage was lost to time and emulsion, but behind him, unmistakably, faint footprints marred the walls. Decades old, surely. A wave of nausea washed over me. The patterns, the prints, they weren't new. Someone else had known this. The mirror. Was it a portal? A window onto a looking-glass domain where physics bowed to nightmare. That night, armed with a torch beam, I stood before the mirror again. The impressions formed a chilling corona overhead. My pulse surged, threatening faintness. I stared into my reflection, slowly raising a hand. The mirrored hand rose in tandem. Leaning closer, my breath misted the cold surface. The mineral smell intensified, biting, frigid. My throat constricted. I reached out, touching the glass. It felt colder than inert material should. I pressed harder. For a fleeting moment, a peculiar resistance met my touch. Not solid, but like pressing against dense, unyielding water. Above, the footprints suddenly glistened brighter. Beads coalesced at their edges, weeping icy tears onto my shoulder. I snatched my hand back, wiping my neck, trembling violently. Had I provoked it? Whatever it was. The torch flickered. My legs shook, sweat tracing cold paths down my back. "Stop this," I pleaded, my voice a feeble croak. "Please." The prints remained. I forced myself to look into the mirror one last time. Something was profoundly wrong. My reflection's eyes held an unfamiliar darkness, sunken, shadowed. The curve of the mouth seemed subtly altered, warped. I blinked hard. The mirrored blink followed mine, but fractionally delayed, disjointed. A knot of ice formed in my stomach. I stumbled back, colliding with a stack of forgotten books. I couldn't endure this place any longer. I had to get out, call someone. But who would believe this madness? Nothing tangible had occurred. No overt attack. Yet my sanity felt frayed to the breaking point. Action, however desperate, was needed. Mustering the frayed remnants of my resolve, I snatched the quilt from the floor. My hands shook so badly I could barely grip the fabric. My intent: cover the glass, then somehow haul the cursed thing out of the house. As I lunged forward, an arctic caress brushed my forearm, like the touch of frozen fingers. A choked gasp escaped me. I swung the torch beam wildly. Nothing. Just the oppressive silence and my spectral tormentor. Before my eyes, the damnable prints commenced a fluid migration across the timber, coalescing into a single, dripping line that snaked inexorably toward the corner where the mirror waited. My breath came in ragged bursts. The choice was stark. Flee now, forever haunted, or confront this presence. Uncle Silas. The promise. The photograph. A warning, perhaps, or a challenge left by a previous witness. Gritting my teeth, I flung the heavy quilt across the glass. It clung for a moment. I pressed my palm flat against the fabric, holding it fast. The cellar air plunged several degrees colder, settling deep in my bones. A frantic vibration thrummed against my palm, as if something on the other side fought against the barrier. Hot tears scalded my vision. I pressed harder, mouthing incoherent prayers for cessation. Then, abruptly, stillness. The vibration ceased. The chill lessened marginally. I staggered back, trembling uncontrollably, tears streaming down my face. Overhead, the footprints remained, dark patches of moisture, but they were quiescent, subdued. For now. I fled the cellar, locking the door behind me, my legs barely supporting my weight. Sleep that night was a shallow, interrupted affair, punctuated by the house's geriatric groans. In the morning, a slick meniscus of moisture lay pooled beneath the cellar door, as if something humid and watchful breathed on the other side. My own face, caught in the hall glass, seemed spectral, hollow-eyed, and I swear, for a terrifying second, my eyes mirrored the darkness I'd seen in the cellar glass. Deeper, their movements lagging just behind my own. I am packing now. The promise to Silas is broken. This house stays unsold, untenanted. Who could inhabit such a place? Passing the stairwell that leads down, I hear it. A faint, rhythmic drip, drip, drip. I know, with chilling certainty, that opening that door would reveal new patterns, perhaps even handprints now, tracing their impossible journeys. I know the mirror waits beneath its shroud, contained, but not conquered. Before I leave, I risk a final glance into the small mirror in the entrance hall. For a heart-stopping instant, my mirrored twin holds its posture askew, head tilted, as if listening to whispers I cannot perceive. My stomach clenches violently. Licking dry lips, I turn away, refusing to linger. I know what resides here. The peril is not vanquished, merely dormant, and the dread remains that someday, glancing into another reflective surface, I might see those damp prints blooming behind me, feel that glacial presence at my shoulder. Should I ever be foolish enough to return, the cellar mirror will be there, waiting, its inverted reality poised to bleed into ours. Phantoms, hauntings, the spectral residue of lives long extinguished. I'd always relegated such notions to the realm of overwrought fiction. A raised eyebrow was my standard reply to tales of rattling chains in dilapidated manors, or whispers in deserted hotel corridors. Until, that is, the evening I took possession of the garret room, in a guest house whose timbers had weathered more than a century of seasons. The proprietor, a Mrs. Thorne, possessed a ramrod posture and an economy of words. She lingered at the threshold, a sentinel guarding her domain, allowing me passage with my battered suitcase before uttering a sound. The key she pressed into my palm was diminutive, its tag frayed, the ink faded. That particular room, she stated, her voice as level and unrevealing as a still pond, tends to remain unoccupied. Guests report disquiet. I offered a dismissive tilt of my head, assuring her I wasn't easily perturbed. A truth, perhaps, before that threshold was crossed. 3 flights of protesting stairs spiraled upwards, each tread groaning underfoot, the ascent steeped in the aroma of aged timber and settled dust. The corridor above stretched narrow and dim, its patterned wallpaper curling away from the plaster like sunburned skin. A solitary bulb suspended from the ceiling shed a weak ochre light that pulsed erratically. My room lay sequestered at the corridor's terminus, adjacent to a small, grime-streaked window overlooking the cobbled street. Pushing open the door revealed Spartan simplicity, a cot-like bed, a diminutive chest of drawers, a lone chair stationed near the window, a cramped closet huddled beneath the slanted eaves, characteristic of an attic space. The air hung thick, stagnant, creating a peculiar pressure against my eardrums, the kind felt when a heavy door seals a confined space. I wrestled the window open, inviting a draft of the cool night air. For a time, my inaugural night unfolded in predictable quiet. Unpacking, a brief shower, then succumbing to weariness around midnight. Being a notoriously light sleeper, I registered every subtle complaint of the old structure, the distant gurgle of water navigating ancient pipes. But near the second hour past midnight, a distinct sound intruded, the unmistakable tread of heavy boots on the bare floorboards outside my door. Not hurried steps, but a slow, deliberate pacing, back and forth, a measured beat in the profound silence. Slipping from the bed, I eased my feet into shoes and cracked the door open just enough to peer out. The corridor lay swallowed in shadow, save for the sickly glow of that single bulb near the stairwell. And there, at the far end, stood a shape. Indistinct, yet undeniably masculine. Tall, clad in what appeared to be an old-fashioned greatcoat, a hat shadowing where a face should be. I blinked, convinced my sleep-addled mind was conjuring phantoms from the gloom. Then, the figure pivoted its head towards me. The dimness obscured any features, yet an absolute certainty flooded me. I was seen. I pushed the door wider, forming a question on my lips. "Can I help you?" But before the words could escape, the figure executed a fluid step backward, melting into the deepest shadows. One instant, a tangible presence. The next, only empty, dust-moated air. A visceral tension seized my frame. The fine hairs on my arms and the nape of my neck prickled erect. I remained frozen in the doorway, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. 10 seconds, perhaps longer, stretched into an eternity of silence. I scanned the corridor again. Vacant. Stepping cautiously into the hall, I walked the length of it, to the very spot where the figure had stood. Nothing. No open doors, no creak of retreating footsteps, no lingering trace. My pulse throbbed in my ears, a heavy, syncopated beat. Forcing slow, deliberate breaths, I retreated to my room, slid the bolt home, and rationalized the vision as a byproduct of exhaustion. Sleep, however, proved elusive. Every settling groan of the house magnified into a potential threat. The man did not reappear, and eventually, just as the sky began to pale towards dawn, oblivion claimed me. Waking late the following day, I immediately sensed a discordance. The small wooden chair beside the window, it wasn't quite right. I distinctly recalled positioning it flush against the wall before sleep, yet now it sat askew, a foot or so from its original place. Perhaps I'd nudged it blindly in the night, I reasoned, or maybe my memory was faulty. Still, an unsettling wrongness lingered. The remainder of the morning passed uneventfully. Downstairs, Mrs. Thorne was methodically wiping down kitchen surfaces. My attempts at conversation were met with clipped, non-committal replies. She offered no inquiry about my night's rest, no mention of nocturnal wanderings or shadowy figures. I elected to keep my experience to myself, departing for the day and returning only as evening deepened. That second night found me attempting to lose myself in a book, the room illuminated solely by the weak amber glow of a small lamp perched on the dresser. Around midnight, a soft, scraping sound emanated from nearby. Perhaps the corridor, perhaps closer, just beyond the door. I held my breath, listening intently. A quiet thump followed. My pulse quickened. Setting the book aside, I crept to the door, pressing my ear against the cool wood. Silence reigned in the hallway. With a decisive twist, I flung the door open and peered out. Emptiness greeted me. Closing the door, I turned back into the room. My gaze fell upon the dresser. It stood several inches from where I knew I'd left it, having meticulously aligned it with a specific imperfection on the floorboards earlier. Now, it listed at an angle. Frowning, I approached and attempted to nudge it back into place. The piece was unexpectedly heavy, solid oak resisting my efforts. It required a concerted shove, bracing my shoulder against it to shift it even fractionally. The notion that it had moved independently seemed preposterous. I scanned the floor for scuff marks, any evidence of dragging. None were apparent. lacking a rational explanation, a knot of unease tightened within me. I remained awake long into the night, my attention fixed on that stoic piece of furniture, perched on the edge of the bed, the lamp casting long, dancing shadows. Around 2:30, a low murmur arose, seeming to originate from the very air near the foot of my bed. It sounded like hushed voices, two distinct whispers overlapping, yet the words remained frustratingly unintelligible. I sprang up, whirling around, eyes darting across the bare walls, the vacant space. The murmuring ebbed, fading into silence. My throat constricted, dry, and I registered a tremor in my hands. I rubbed my arms, trying to quell the shaking, straining to pinpoint the source of the whispers, but they had simply emanated from the vicinity of the bed, then ceased. Sleep was a fraught, shallow affair that night. Each time I drifted close, the unnerving sensation of being watched snapped me back to wary consciousness. By the third day, exhaustion had settled deep into my bones. My eyes burned. My head felt leaden. Downstairs, I attempted breakfast, managing only a few gulps of bitter coffee. Mrs. Thorne, observing me, inquired if everything was satisfactory. I manufactured a smile, assuring her I was fine, unwilling to confess that her attic room seemed intent on unraveling my sanity. Seeking respite, I stepped outside into the morning air. The guest house presented an aged facade to the street, its tall windows framed in cracked weathered wood. A steep roof culminated in a small, rusted weather vane. My eyes found the attic window, my window. A peculiar detachment washed over me, a fleeting sensation of observing myself from that high vantage point, or perhaps viewing the scene from an entirely different point in time. That night, I resolved to capture evidence. My phone lay ready, poised to record any anomalous sounds. I lay rigid in bed, lamp extinguished, device clutched in my hand. Around midnight, the familiar creaking commenced in the corridor. The footsteps returned, louder this time, more insistent. I heard them approach my door, pause momentarily, then continue their measured patrol down the hall. Counting several beats of my racing heart, I slipped out of bed, opened the door, and stepped into the passage. The ceiling bulb flickered violently, and there he was again, the same figure, standing near the stairwell, dark coat, wide-brimmed hat casting his face into impenetrable shadow. He appeared solid, corporeal, not some translucent wisp. I raised my phone, fumbling with the record function, but in the instant it took to aim, the light flickered once more, plunging the corridor into momentary darkness. When it steadied, he was gone. I sprinted down the hallway to the head of the stairs. Empty. I descended cautiously to the floor below, checking the landing. Silence. No closing doors, no fading footfalls. A profound chill permeated my body, unrelated to the ambient temperature. The air carried a faint, incongruous scent of old leather. Breathing heavily, I climbed back to the attic, back to my room. Reviewing the phone's recording yielded nothing but a shaky view of a dimly lit, empty corridor. A frustrated curse escaped my lips. Locking the door, I sank onto the bed, attempting to regain composure. Suddenly, the lamp on the dresser extinguished itself. I froze, every muscle taut. A second later, it flickered back to life. Sweat beaded on my palms. Leaping up, I examined the cord, securely plugged in. I toggled the switch. It functioned perfectly, no hint of a faulty connection. Backing away, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps, I wrestled with the urge to flee. Only stubborn pride, the reluctance to hear Mrs. Thorne's unspoken, "I warned you," kept me rooted to the spot. My stomach churned, unable to settle, unable to remain still. In the pre-dawn hours, a fragile sleep finally claimed me. It lasted only a few hours before a grating, screeching noise ripped through the quiet. Loud, sharp, resonant, like heavy metal dragged across rough concrete. Disoriented, I sat bolt upright in bed, heart pounding erratically. The sound echoed again, seeming to originate from somewhere beneath me, perhaps the cellar. Grabbing my phone and a small torch, I eased open my door and navigated the darkened house downwards. Silence had reclaimed the building. It was nearing 4 a.m., the deepest part of the night. I found the basement door, usually shut tight, now standing slightly ajar. The light switch beside it buzzed, the bulb flickering fitfully. My torch beam sliced through the opening, revealing stone steps descending into blackness. The air that rose to meet me was damp, stale, redolent of cold concrete and mildew. A powerful aversion warred with an undeniable compulsion to investigate. Step by tentative step, I descended, muscles coiled tight, my grip on the torch so fierce my knuckles ached. The basement lights above sputtered inconsistently. The space below was a cluttered repository of the past, shrouded furniture, teetering stacks of boxes lining the walls. I expected disruption, evidence of intrusion, but the cavernous room was still deserted. Then, a faint rattling from behind a towering set of shelves drew my attention. Moving closer, I saw it. A small metal chain, suspended from a hook, swinging gently back and forth, its links clicking softly against the shelving unit. No draft stirred the stagnant air. No window lay open. There was no discernible reason for its movement. A flush of heat spread across my face. Adrenaline's signature. My breathing grew shallow. I stood immobile, torch beams sweeping the subterranean landscape. The thudding of my own heart, the only significant sound. Then, the overhead bulb flared brightly for an instant, before plunging the basement into absolute darkness. A spike of pure fear lanced through my chest. I swung the torch beam towards the shelves. Nothing. Turning, I began my retreat up the stairs. It was then I saw them. Handprints, rendered starkly visible in the thick dust coating the wooden banister. Dozens of them, large and small, unmistakably adult hands, overlapping in a chaotic multitude. It looked as if a throng had passed through, each pressing their palm against the railing. Yet the dust lay otherwise undisturbed, thick and gray, and I hadn't heard a single sound beyond my own cautious movements. How could so many prints appear so silently? I backed away slowly, my light tracing the ghostly impressions. My mind struggled to reconcile the sight with logic. Reaching out tentatively, I touched the banister beside one print. Dust clung to my fingertips. The prints themselves remained pristine, sharply defined, except for the small smudge my own touch had created. Swallowing hard against a rising nausea, I wiped my hand on my trousers. The urge to summon Mrs. Thorne warred with the futility of it. I crept up the remaining steps, slipped through the basement door, and twisted the key firmly in the lock. Standing in the relative safety of the ground floor hallway, I fought to steady my breathing. The hall light burned steadily now, casting a normal, unwavering glow. The rest of the guest house remained wrapped in profound silence. Returning to the attic room felt like traversing enemy territory. Every shadow seemed deeper, every creak more menacing. My hands trembled uncontrollably. A film of cold sweat coated my forehead and the back of my neck. Bolting the door behind me, I leaned against it, ears ringing. I paced the confines of the small room, trying to formulate a plan, trying to decide whether to pack my bags and vanish into the pre-dawn gray. One part of me screamed for escape, for distance from this place of unsettling occurrences. Yet another, more stubborn part felt inexplicably tethered, caught in the house's strange gravity. It was more than mere curiosity now. It felt like being snagged between two overlapping realities. The tangible present of creaking floors and flickering lights, and some other, older stratum, populated by spectral figures and inexplicably migrating furniture. Sleep remained a distant country. As the sun finally asserted itself, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and tentative gold, I found myself by the window, watching the mundane procession of early risers on the street below. Oblivious figures clutching coffee cups and briefcases, moving through a world utterly separate from the one contained within these walls. Later, summoning my resolve, I descended to confront Mrs. Thorne. I found her at the front desk, shuffling through papers. Before I could articulate my experiences, she spoke, her voice devoid of surprise, almost matter-of-fact. "I gather you've been disturbed." It wasn't a question. She offered no elaboration, merely regarded me with eyes that seemed weary beyond measure. I waited, hoping for context, for explanation, but silence stretched between us. When I finally asked about the man in the corridor, the moving objects, the basement phenomena, she simply shook her head slowly. "It's a very old house, Mr. Davies," she said, her gaze distant. "Sometimes it doesn't take kindly to newcomers." It was all the explanation she would provide. I retreated to my room, closing the door on the silent house. My nerves felt frayed to the point of snapping. The line between reality and perception had blurred dangerously. Sitting on the edge of the narrow bed, I mentally replayed the sequence of events. The rhythmic footsteps, the figure's unnerving presence and sudden vanishing, the inexplicably rearranged furniture, the disembodied whispers, the unlocked basement door, the chilling gallery of dusty handprints. A sense of entrapment settled over me, a claustrophobia both physical and psychological. My heart hammered anew with each recalled incident. The desire to leave warred with an equally potent, irrational pull to understand. Pacing, checking my phone, staring out the window, nothing could soothe the internal tremor. And so, here I remain, perched in this attic room under the eaves, suspended in a state of hyper-vigilant waiting. The corridor outside is quiet for now. Mrs. Thorne is somewhere below, a silent custodian of secrets. My hands still possess a slight tremor, and my eyes keep darting towards the closet, half expecting it to shift. The overhead bulb flickers intermittently, each pulse a jolt to my system. I cannot shake the feeling of being observed, of sharing this space not just with dust and old wood, but with echoes, with remnants. This house feels porous, existing simultaneously, in multiple times, and I am somehow caught in the confluence. How much longer I will endure this remains uncertain, but for this moment, I am here, listening, waiting, hoping the next manifestation doesn't finally shatter my fraying hold on reason. Ghosts were never part of my lexicon. Now the space behind my shoulder feels perpetually occupied. The project schematic swam before Elias's eyes, a blur of lines and figures dissolving into the pre-dawn gray. Exhaustion, profound and bone-deep, had settled in hours ago, yet he'd pushed on, fueled by caffeine and looming deadlines. Now, nearing 4 in the morning, surrender felt less like defeat and more like salvation. All that beckoned was the oblivion of his bed, a few precious hours stolen before the relentless cycle began anew. He resided in Willow Creek, a placid enclave where ambition went to retire, nestled amongst manicured lawns and slumbering houses. Excitement was a foreign concept here, traded willingly for a predictable tranquility Elias cherished. The drone of a distant mower, the yelp of a playing child, the comforting weight of collective quietude. This was his sanctuary until that morning. He had barely burrowed beneath the cool sheets, eyelids heavy as stones, when the silence fractured. His phone, forgotten on the nightstand, erupted with a startling insistence, a digital shriek in the stillness. A jolt ran through him. Squinting against the phone's glare, half braced for the absurdity of late-night telemarketing, he saw only 2 stark words. Unknown number. A sensible person would ignore it. Elias, however, felt an inexplicable nudge, a curiosity stronger than fatigue. Clearing a throat thick with sleep, he answered the word raspy. Hello. A void answered back, just empty air, stretching thin, perhaps a dropped connection. But then, unmistakably, it came. Respiration, measured and slow, unnervingly close on the other end. Hello, Elias repeated, a thread of irritation weaving into his tone. More breathing, a steady, rhythmic presence. Then, a voice, barely corporeal, a wisp of sound against the static. Don't go outside. He sat bolt upright, his heart executing a painful leap. Who is this? The demand was sharper now, edged with nascent fear. What is it you want? Only the void replied, followed by the finality of a click. Disconnected. Elias stared at the dark screen, a cold prickle mapping his skin. A prank, surely. Some bored teenager dialing random numbers, feeding on the reaction. He forced the phone back onto the nightstand, attempting to dismiss the tendrils of disquiet coiling within him. Lying back, eyes clamped shut, he courted sleep once more. But the whisper persisted, an insidious echo in the chambers of his mind. Don't go outside. Illogical, absurd, yet impossible to shake. Sleep remained elusive. Giving up, Elias swung his legs out of bed, rubbing the grit from his eyes. The clock glowed 4:30 a.m. Dawn wasn't far off, painting the eastern horizon in faint washes of indigo. Coffee, perhaps. A head start on the day might dispel the lingering strangeness. It was then he heard it. A tentative rapping, soft against the wood of his front door. He froze, his pulse instantly erratic. Solitude was his norm. Visitors, especially at this liminal hour, were unheard of. His gaze flickered to the silent phone. The knock came again, firmer this time, imbued with a quiet insistence. Heart thudding against his ribs like a trapped bird. Elias crept from the bedroom, navigating the darkened hallway by feel. He avoided light switches, unwilling to betray his wakefulness. reaching the foyer, he rose onto the balls of his feet, pressing his eye to the peephole's distorted lens. Nothing. Empty porch, silent street bathed in the pre-dawn gloom. A frown tightened his features, though the frantic rhythm in his chest refused to slow. He pressed his ear flat against the cool wood, straining for any sound. Silence reigned. Just as he began to pull away, convinced his tired mind was playing tricks, the knock returned, louder now, transitioning from a rap to an unnerving, solid thud. He recoiled, mind scrambling. Call the authorities? But report what? An early morning knock. He drew a shaky breath, grappling for composure, his hand drifting instinctively toward the deadbolt. And then the whisper resurfaced, sharp and clear in his memory. Don't go outside. His fingers hovered, paralyzed by the remembered warning. A prank, he reasoned again, his logic battling a rising tide of primal fear. Someone finding amusement in terrorizing a stranger. Yet, a visceral chill traced his spine. The thudding ceased. Elias waited, every muscle taut, listening with an intensity that hurt his ears. Nothing but the profound quiet of a neighborhood still lost to dreams. He retreated a step, eyes locked on the door, uncertainty warring within him. Then the phone shrieked again. He snatched it up, hands trembling, the screen blazing. Unknown number. A surge of anger, laced with cold dread, propelled him to answer. Who is this? What do you want? His voice was tight, strained. The familiar cadence of slow, deliberate breathing filled the line. Then the whisper, softer, somehow more chilling than before. Don't go outside. Don't open the door. His heart hammered, thoughts scattering like frightened birds. Who are you? He demanded, desperation creeping in. What is this about? No response, only the disembodied breath. Another click. Silence. He stood rooted, phone clutched in a white-knuckled grip, pulse a frantic drum against his temples. Ignore it. Heed the warning. It bore all the hallmarks of a cruel joke, yet the quality of that voice, its spectral detachment, resonated with a dread that felt chillingly authentic. He would wait. He backed further away from the door, his gaze fixed upon it, listening for the slightest creak, the faintest shuffle. Minutes bled into one another. Slowly, inevitably, the sun asserted itself, spilling weak, watery light through the living room windows. Elias finally released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, the tension easing fractionally. Coffee. He needed coffee to chase away the lingering phantoms of the night. He was measuring grounds into the filter when a sharp tap, tap, tap sounded, not at the door, but at the kitchen window directly above the sink. He spun around, heart seizing, staring at the closed blinds. Behind them, a vague distortion, a silhouette hazily perceived, the undeniable impression of someone standing just beyond the glass, observing. He stumbled back, every nerve screaming retreat. The police. Again, the thought surfaced, and again the question. Report. What? A shadow. It felt nightmarish, utterly disconnected from the mundane reality of Willow Creek. His phone vibrated against the countertop, another summons from the unknown number. He recoiled as if burned, wanting nothing more than to hurl the device against the wall. Yet, compulsion won. He pressed accept, raising the phone slowly, his hand unsteady. Don't look, the whisper commanded, at the window. A wave of icy cold washed through him. "Who are you?" he breathed, the question barely audible even to himself. Silence held for a beat. Then just before the line died, one final, chilling sibilance. "They're watching." The connection severed. Elias remained frozen, phone pressed hard against his ear, staring at the blind-covered window. Comprehension eluded him. The caller, the motive, the presence outside, all shrouded in terrifying ambiguity. But one certainty crystallized. Something lingered out there. Something invested in his ignorance, his blindness. He sank to the cool kitchen tiles, phone still clutched tight, back pressed against the cabinets, his mind a maelstrom of fear. He waited, scarcely daring to breathe, straining for any sound above his own frantic pulse. Hours crawled by. The sun climbed higher, bathing the room in the deceptive normalcy of daylight. Safety, however, felt galaxies away. Every glance towards the window brought back the icy dread, the unshakable conviction of unseen eyes upon him. Eventually, summoning a fragile courage, Elias crept to the window. He eased the edge of the blind away just enough to peer out. Nothing. The lawn was empty, the street deserted, the picture of suburban serenity, as if nothing had transpired. But Elias knew. The terror hadn't evaporated with the morning mist. He knew they remained, concealed, patient, observing, and every night since confirms it. The soft knock evolves to a heavy thud. The tap returns at the window pane. The phone inevitably rings, displaying its cryptic caller ID. And always, the same disembodied whisper delivers its chilling litany. Don't go outside. Don't look. They're watching. The memory clings, sharp as broken glass. The abandoned railway bore gaping before me, my camera a cold weight in my hand, the beam of my torch stuttering against the gloom. Sepulchral quiet, the corroded skeletons of forgotten industry. That was the promise. A promise shattered the moment a second breath, not my own, began to pulse in the oppressive dark. I'd unearthed the tunnel's location from the digital dust of a local history archive, a footnote mentioning a defunct line, silenced decades prior. Whispers on obscure forums spoke of vaulted arches, elegant decay, fodder for a photographic project humming in the back of my mind. Solitude was circumstance, not choice. Companions were elsewhere that weekend. A simple canvas pack held the essentials: water, a backup light, the camera's delicate eyes. Twilight bled across the sky as I arrived. The maw of the tunnel yawned wider than anticipated, tracks long plundered, leaving a treacherous floor of rock and scree sloping into blackness. Concrete lips crumbled at the edges, besieged by tenacious weeds and grasping shrubs. My torch beam sliced inwards, swallowed instantly. It caught only fleeting glimpses, spectral graffiti bleeding down weeping walls, the glint of moisture weeping from invisible fissures overhead. Drip, drip. Each splash echoed like a struck bell. Hesitantly, I crossed the threshold. The air turned instantly chill, heavy with the scent of wet stone and ancient mold. Each footfall crunched, amplified in the confined space. My own respiration sounded unnervingly loud, though I fought to keep it steady. A few test exposures flared, the flash momentarily blinding, too brutal for the subtle ruin. I switched tactics, mounting the camera on its tripod for a slower, deeper gaze into the dark, carefully wedging the legs against the uneven ground. It was then, adjusting the focus ring, that a subtle dissonance snagged my attention. A sound, rhythmic, hovering just beneath my own breathing. An echo? I tried matching its cadence. Inhale, exhale. But mine was quicker, edged with the thrill of trespass. This was different. Slow, deliberate, unnervingly calm. Surely, a trick of the tunnel's throat, the way sound twisted and returned. I pushed the thought away, bent back to my task. The camera clicked, captured the image. Reviewing the small screen, a prickle traced the nape of my neck. The breathing was there again, patient, measured. Inhale, exhale. Impulsively, I killed the light. Blindness rushed in. Absolute. No distant glimmer marked the entrance now. I'd wandered too far into the earth's gullet. I held my own breath, straining to hear. Only the frantic drumbeat in my ears, a distant, lonely drip. Then, a faint disturbance. The whisper's soft scuff of something shifting on the gritty floor. Not me. My thumb found the switch. The torch flared back to life, sweeping a frantic arc. Empty. Just rough-hewn walls slick with damp, weeping dark trails. A derelict maintenance door, rusted shut, slumped nearby. Pebbles and the ghosts of discarded cans littered the ground. An animal, perhaps. Water pooling and spilling. Rational thoughts warred with a rising tide of unease. I pressed onward, the torch beam a nervous pendulum painting the walls. Paused now and then to capture the skeletal beauty of overhead supports. The drip, drip, drip became a constant, mournful percussion from countless leaks. The air grew colder still, my exhalations misting faintly before me. Walls grew wetter, long streaks of moisture glistening like slug trails. Then I saw them, stranger marks, smeared and purposeful. Closer inspection revealed shapes horrifyingly familiar. Handprints. Stark against the weeping stone, they looked impossibly fresh. Beads of condensation clinging to the outlines of fingers, of palms pressed hard. My heart gave a painful lurch. These weren't random stains. They were gestures frozen in moisture. Tentatively, I touched one. The surface was slick, glacial. My fingertips came away wet. Wiping them absently on my jeans, I swung the light low, searching the floor for tracks. Only my own boot prints disturbed the dust and debris. And the breathing returned. Closer now. Much closer. I froze, spun around. The torch beam illuminated nothing but empty corridor, damp stone, uneven ground. A tremor started in my hand, the light dancing erratically. I'd half expected a silhouette, a watcher in the shadows. Nothing. My mouth was parchment, a forced, shaky breath. Just the dark, I told myself. Your mind conjuring phantoms. Yet the conviction of a presence lingered, heavy as the subterranean air. Forward seemed the only option. The tunnel supposedly ran half a mile. Find the other end. Get out. I resumed walking, trying to ignore the soft scuffs, the echoes that seemed to mimic my pace from behind. Each step felt thunderous. The pack straps bit into my shoulders, suddenly heavier. The chill air numbed my cheeks. A subtle current of air began to push against me, a faint but distinct draft flowing from the tunnel's deeper recesses. I paused, fumbling for my water bottle. My hand shook as I raised it, the simple act feeling monumental. A few gulps of cool liquid, then listening. That rhythmic respiration started again, seemingly materializing directly behind my head. I whirled, torch held high like a weapon. Empty space, mocked me. My heart hammered against my ribs. Keep moving. Minutes later, something brushed my shoulder. A light, distinct tap, like a single, inquisitive finger. I flinched violently, nearly dropping the torch, stumbling as I spun. Light speared the space behind me. Only the weeping wall. My shoulder tingled where the touch had landed. A drop from the ceiling. I craned my neck. The rock above was dry. Raw panic surged. Sweat beaded on my forehead despite the profound cold. The torch flickered, buzzed faintly. A sharp tap against the casing steadied the beam. Faster now, my steps became a hurried clatter, echoing frantically. My eyes scanned the floor, catching sight of decaying railroad ties, half buried, treacherous. Ahead, a peculiar luminescence began to bloom in the distance. Not daylight. Night had fully fallen outside. This was different. A faint, ethereal shimmer, its source hidden. Drawing nearer, the tunnel widened into what might have been a loading area or workshop. Here, the air felt unnaturally frigid. My torch beam slid across a structure on the left. A crude table, a makeshift platform. Closer inspection revealed small candles, melted into puddles of dark wax, arranged in a deliberate circle upon an old sheet of metal laid across shattered cinder blocks. Symbols, crude and jagged, were scratched violently into the metal surface. Beside the waxen remains lay a small, unsettling pile of bones. Delicate, avian perhaps, certainly not human, clustered together. An altar. The words sprang unwelcome into my mind. The place radiated a palpable wrongness. I recoiled, palms suddenly slick with sweat. That strange, internal wind picked up, colder now, whispering past me, raising goose flesh on my arms. It carried an earthy, damp smell, like disturbed soil. It snaked beneath my jacket, a chilling reminder of my vulnerability. My breathing turned ragged. Steadying myself, I swept the light around again. More wet handprints adorned the walls near this profane space, palms pressed flat as if in supplication or despair. Leaning closer to examine one, watching water trace its outline, I heard it. A definite scrape from behind me, the sound of something heavy dragged across stone. I spun, the torch beam catching something. A flicker of movement by the altar, a shape retracting swiftly behind a thick support pillar. My pulse leaped. Heart pounding, I advanced, light fixed on the pillar. Nothing. No one. Just the cold stone, the echo of my own frantic pulse drumming in my ears. My mouth was utterly dry. Turn back, the thought screamed. Yet a morbid curiosity, a perverse need for evidence, held me fast. I'd come for unique images, hadn't I? And who would believe this bizarre tableau without proof? I raised the camera, the flash detonating in the darkness, momentarily painting the cracked walls, the metal sheet, the candle stubs in stark relief. Then the breathing, this time to my right, intimate, almost in my ear. I flinched, triggering the flash again out of sheer reflex. A panicked burst of light revealing only empty air and glistening stone. My hands shook uncontrollably. Onward, toward the faint hope of an exit. The tunnel began a slow curve, obscuring the view ahead. The strange breeze intensified, pushing against my face, rustling unseen debris on the floor. Loose stones shifted, spectral scraps of paper danced in the torchlight. I scanned the darkness ahead, desperate for an opening, for the square of night sky. Nothing. Perhaps the exit was blocked, or simply further still. I paused near a ragged breach in the wall, dark cavity hinting at a side passage, jagged rebar protruding like broken teeth. Water pooled at its entrance. A wave of revulsion, a primal warning washed over me. I skirted it, refusing to look too closely into its shadowed depths. Another soft grating sound whispered from behind. Pivot. Light up. Nothing. Breath hitched, coming in shallow gasps. The urge to flee became overwhelming, a physical pressure. My skin felt clammy beneath my clothes, my boots scuffing frantically on the uneven floor. Every drip, every echo, every rustle sent jolts through my system. My shoulders were granite knots of tension. Was someone else here, toying with me, hiding just beyond the light? The thought sent ice through my veins. Exit. Home. That was all that mattered. Finally, the passage straightened. A pale glow resolved ahead. Moonlight, faint but unmistakable, filtering through the far entrance. Relief crashed over me, potent, almost painful. I surged forward, half running, stumbling over loose rocks. Almost there. One last glance back. One final sweep of the torch down the corridor I'd just traversed. My light caught them then. Footprints on the damp ground. Footprints I hadn't made, hadn't noticed before. Narrower than my boots. Bare. At least 4 distinct impressions leading directly towards me. My heart seized, and then again, that impossible touch. A light pressure on my shoulder. Firm, deliberate. I cried out, spinning with such violence I nearly fell, the torch beam slashing wildly. Who's there? The question fractured, echoing back at me a dozen times from the uncaring stone. Silence answered, save for the distant, rhythmic dripping. My head throbbed. Backing away now, facing the darkness, torch trembling. I retreated towards the beckoning moonlight. Mere steps from the threshold, the breeze became a sudden, frigid gust, shoving me forward. I switched off the torch, letting my eyes adjust. The blessed silhouettes of bushes, the jagged edge of broken concrete outside. I stumbled out, gulping the clean night air, legs threatening to buckle. Deep breaths, trying to quell the violent tremor within. I looked back. The tunnel mouth was a perfect, silent square of black, utterly still, but not empty. The handprints, the altar, the bones, that breathing, they were real. I stood for a minute, maybe 2, adrift. The outdoor quiet felt alien after the tunnel's suffocating acoustics. My camera felt heavy again. Later, the photos would show blurred walls, the glint of water, the crude altar stark under the flash. No figures lurked in the corners, only shadows and shapes the mind could twist into fearful forms. Wordlessly, I turned and walked, stumbling slightly, back towards the distant car. My hands still shook. Every few yards, an involuntary glance over my shoulder pierced the darkness behind me. Reaching the car, I fumbled with the lock, tumbled inside, slammed the door, engaged the locks. Sat there, breath sawing in my chest, the echo of the tunnel's chill clinging to me. Damp hair plastered to my forehead. The engine roared to life, offensively loud in the sudden stillness. I drove, eyes flicking constantly to the rearview mirror, expecting something. Saw only the empty ribbon of road unwinding behind me. No explanation ever surfaced for the breathing, the prints, the touch. The photographs reside on a hard drive, digital ghosts of weeping walls and melted wax. Looking at them still conjures that icy tension, that crawl of dread up the spine, an abandoned railroad tunnel. If asked, that's my geography of fear, and the phantom pressure on my shoulder. my skin remembers the cold. The stuttering pulse of neon bled vacancy onto the rain-slicked asphalt, a weak promise against the oppressive dark. Beside it, color TV buzzed, half dead. Pulling onto the cracked gravel, the crunch loud in the silence, my mind fixated only on oblivion, the scalding spray of a shower, the anonymous embrace of a pillow. This roadside relic, clinging to existence miles from anywhere, felt less like sanctuary and more like the end of the line. I couldn't know then that checking in was stepping into the longest, most suffocating night imaginable. Endless ribbons of highway had spooled behind me for hours, leaving my vision blurred, my eyelids gritty sandpaper. When the sun finally bled out beneath the horizon, the world dissolved into a hypnotic dance of oncoming headlights and shape-shifting shadows. Spotting the motel sign was like finding a single, flickering match in an infinite cavern. Peeling paint, fractured letters. Such details dissolved against the primal need for rest. It was shelter. Nothing else registered. The reception office hung thick with the ghosts of stale tobacco and the aggressive sweetness of chemical pine. Presiding over the worn Formica counter was a woman, Agnes, her face a roadmap of years, yet arranged into a semblance of welcome. She slid the key to number 8 across the counter, the plastic tag worn smooth. "Sleep well," she offered, her voice thin as old paper. Exhaustion had leached the capacity for pleasantries from me. A mumbled thanks was all I could manage. Room 8 was compact, smelling faintly of damp and disinfectant. My duffel landed on the questionable floral bedspread with a thud. The shower beckoned. Water pressure sighed rather than sprayed, achieving a tepid warmth that nonetheless felt like a benediction on my road-weary skin. Toweling off, my gaze snagged on a brochure nestled by the lamp, its pages yellowed. A history of the Starlight Motor Inn, it proclaimed, boasting of its 1950s origins with faded snapshots of bygone travelers, frozen in moments of optimistic transit. My eyes drifted over a paragraph tucked near the back, detailing local curiosities, whispers of guests who'd checked in over the decades and simply vanished, dismissed as rural tall tales. A dry rasp, something like a laugh, escaped me. Every crumbling haven had its hauntings, real or imagined. I surrendered to the lumpy mattress, surfing the static-laced channels on the archaic television before darkness claimed me. Consciousness returned abruptly near midnight, pulled back by a subtle disturbance outside my door. Footfalls, perhaps. Tentative, shuffling. Dragging myself up, I pressed my eye to the peephole's distorted lens. The corridor stretched empty, bathed in the sickly yellow glow of a low-watt bulb. Just another transient, I reasoned, retreating to the questionable comfort of the bed. But sleep remained elusive. An intangible pressure had settled in the room, a density to the air that prickled my skin. My thoughts kept circling back to the brochure, to the smiling faces in the photos, juxtaposed with the unsettling notion of departures never recorded. As drowsiness threatened again, a distinct click sounded within the room. My eyes snapped open, straining against the gloom. Then I saw it. A minuscule crimson eye, blinking rhythmically from the grill of the air vent near the ceiling. My pulse leaped. Stumbling out of bed, drawn by a horrified magnetism, I confirmed the impossible camera. Adrenaline surged, cold and sharp. A frantic scan of the room revealed another, nestled cunningly behind a cheap landscape painting above the dresser. Violation twisted into raw panic. Who? Why? My hand scrabbled for my phone, the instinct to call for help immediate. Primal. No service. The bleak notification glowed mocking confirmation of my isolation. Escape. Now. Clothes were thrown on haphazardly, stealth abandoned. My hand reached for the doorknob, freezing as the soft scuffing returned to the hallway. Closer now, quicker, imbued with undeniable purpose. The steps halted directly outside my door. Silence descended, thick and terrifying, broken only by the frantic drumming in my ears. Then a light rap on the wood. Everything all right in there, honey? Agnes. Her voice, previously thin, now dripped with a cloying solicitousness. Silence was my only reply, my breath trapped, certain she could hear the wild hammering of my heart against my ribs. We noticed you were stirring, she continued, the word we landing like a physical blow. Just thought we'd see if you needed anything. We. I remained rigid, praying for her retreat. Instead, the faint, metallic jingle of keys reached me. I'll just let myself in. Make sure you're okay, dear. Panic detonated. I wrenched the door inward, catching her off guard. She staggered back, the key glinting in her hand. Looming behind her stood a man I hadn't seen before. Tall, wide-shouldered, his face impassive as granite. Silas. Oh. Agnes recovered swiftly, her smile snapping back into place, though it never touched her eyes. You gave me a fright. Is something the matter? I forced a nod, struggling to keep my voice level. No, fine. Just needed some air. Her gaze sharpened. At this hour, it's not wise to wander, dear. Come to the office. We'll fix you a nice cup of tea. Silas hadn't shifted, his stare pinning me like an insect. My grip tightened on my bag. Thank you. No. I think I'll just take a short drive. I attempted to edge past them, but Silas moved with surprising speed, blocking my egress. I'm afraid that won't be possible, he stated, his voice a low rumble that vibrated with menace. In that instant, the vague unease crystallized into stark, undeniable terror. Thought evaporated, instinct took over. I lunged, shoving past Agnes, propelled by sheer adrenaline down the dingy corridor towards the glowing exit sign. Their footsteps pounded behind me, echoing unnervingly in the narrow space. I slammed through the exit door into the cool, damp night. The parking lot was a void, my car solitary under the buzzing neon. As I sprinted towards it, Agnes's voice pursued me, thin and sharp. You can't leave, dear. Nobody ever leaves. My keys felt alien in my trembling hands. The lock seemed impossibly small. Just as the car door clicked open, a heavy hand clamped onto my shoulder, spinning me around. Silas. His stone face was now contorted with fury. Shouldn't have found the cameras, he snarled. No time to think, only react. My knee drove upward, connecting hard. He gasped, doubling over, his grip loosening. I scrambled into the driver's seat, slammed the door, twisted the key. The engine roared, a defiant sound in the stillness. Tires spat gravel as I fishtailed out of the lot. In the rearview mirror's brief, nightmarish tableau, Agnes and Silas stood motionless, watching me flee into the swallowing darkness. Hours passed in a blur of speed and fear, my eyes constantly flicking to the mirror, expecting pursuit. Only when the bruised colors of dawn began to stain the eastern sky did I dare pull into the bright, noisy sanctuary of a truck stop. The call to the police felt surreal. I recounted the events, my voice shaky. They took the report, their expressions professionally sympathetic, but tinged with skepticism. Hidden cameras in a dilapidated motel. Likely some lonely deviant, they suggested gently. But the cold certainty remained lodged deep within me. It was more than voyeurism. The way they'd tried to contain me. Agnes's chilling pronouncement. Nobody ever leaves. Something predatory resided within those thin walls. The official investigation yielded nothing concrete, citing insufficient evidence. The Starlight Motor Inn remained, its vacancy sign continuing its weak, intermittent invitation to the lost and the weary. I never learned the fate of the other vanished guests, but I carry the knowledge, a cold weight in my gut. Now, every time the silhouette of a roadside motel emerges from the twilight, my foot presses harder on the accelerator, my knuckles white on the wheel, because the darkness holds watchers, waiting patiently for the next traveler to seek refuge, check in,